This daring Dane would be the only non-Commonwealth soldier awarded a Victoria Cross in World War II. Born into a blue-blooded family, in his incredible yet short life, he would sail the world's oceans, train as a commando, and finally fight for the legendary Special Boat Service. Today, we're looking at the life, military career, and most importantly, the medals of Major Anders Lassen. Anders Lassen was born near Murg in Vordingborg in South Zealand. His father was a landowner and his mother was an author and illustrator from an aristocratic family. Focusing on managing his estate, his father would attempt, unsuccessfully, to be a Conservative candidate for Parliament several times. His father would also be a reserve officer in the Royal Lifeguards Reserve. Lassen would have a fairly typical childhood for a boy of his background. As a child, he loved the outdoors, especially archery, shooting and hunting. He would also learn to sail on the local lakes. After a period being homeschooled, he would be sent to boarding school. There, he would find out he would love the sports, but he wasn't particularly academic. And a rather harsh school report written of him at the time would say, "Nice but slow, surprisingly ignorant, immature compared to his class, has great difficulty being attentive in class, has difficulty getting used to regular, thorough work. It seems as if his bodily growth stands in the way of his mental development." At school, he would also develop a kidney disease which would plague him for the remainder of his life, on and off. As a child, surprisingly, Lassen wasn't interested in a career in the army. After graduating from school, he attended Physical Training Academy, attempting to qualify as a PE teacher, but was frustrated by the academic side of the course and dropped out after one term. Unsure what to do with his life and with a lust for adventure, Lassen then signed up as a cabin boy, working with the East Asiatic Company on the ship Fionia. The ship set sail from Copenhagen to Bangkok on a 4-month round trip. Although enjoying travelling to the exotic Far East, Lassen found the work as a cabin boy on board boring and menial, complaining in a letter that sailing is shit. He returned to Denmark for a period of leave and then unsuccessfully attempted to use family connections to secure a more office-based role, before ultimately deciding to rejoin the Merchant Navy. In July 1939, he signed a 4-year contract with another shipping company. This time, he would become a ship's mate on board the Eleonora Maersk, a tanker. Like many young people, he was still trying to figure out what to do in life, and he saw this as a great opportunity to see a bit more of the world and make some money. His ship would sail to Mexico and the Caribbean, and on the way visit various ports, such as in Europe. Although a slow starter, he would gain a reputation as a bit of a lad, loving the booze and partying when on shore leave. Typical sailor, I suppose. When stopping off in England with the ship, he recalled, "Was at shore yesterday. Everyone legless except me. Incredible how little some can take. Falmouth is boring, by the way." It's a bit harsh on Falmouth. When war broke out in Europe in September 1939, Lassen initially showed little interest. Later in the year, when the Winter War broke out between Finland and the Soviet Union, some Danes he knew volunteered to fight for Finland against the USSR, and he briefly considered joining them, but ultimately decided against it. Interestingly, and I didn't know this before I started my research, but over 1,200 Danes volunteered to fight for Finland against the Soviets. Most of them, however, were still training behind the lines for winter warfare when the Finns surrendered. Lassen would enjoy the benefits of sailing on a merchant ship that was operating in wartime areas, receiving extra pay, and he would state he'd use that money to smoke cigars and drink brandy rather than roll-ups and beer. Lassen's view of the war would change when Germany invaded Denmark in April 1940. Like many Danes, he was outraged at the invasion and now would take the war personally. During that time, his ship was in the Persian Gulf, and the crew would force the captain of the vessel to turn itself over to British control, and they sailed to Colombo in modern-day Sri Lanka, or as it was then called, Ceylon. There, Lassen would be a bit of a hellraiser on leave. He would get into trouble brawling with a hotel manager who tried to throw him and his gaggle of rowdy sailors out of a posh hotel. He would also get into an altercation over stolen money at a brothel. In one of these two escapades, he would lose his front teeth. Lassen would eventually sail to Scotland on a merchant ship, determined to volunteer to fight the Germans serving with the British. Arriving in the UK in December 1940, he was initially recruited by the Danish wing of the Special Operations Executive. They would take him through special training schools, but the SOE course at the time relied heavily on theory and classroom-based training, which Lassen naturally detested. Although not doing great on that, he would excel at the more practical paramilitary and commando element of the training. And that said, although a fine combat soldier, instructors would deem him not reliable enough for special duties, or being a special agent, which required an element of being the grey man and discretion. You had to blend in rather than stand out. Reading between the lines in layman's terms, it seems essentially, being the colourful character that he was, there was a high chance of him getting pissed up in the pub, getting a bit rowdy and spilling the beans. No doubt, having a swaggering Dolph Lundgren lookalike with the penchant for the occasional brawl isn't exactly the best candidate for a secret agent. However, Lassen was still regarded as a valuable asset, as he demonstrated an outstanding ability in the paramilitary elements of the course. In August 1941, he was transferred as a qualified sailor to the Maid Honour Force. The Maid Honour was a small vessel crewed by around 20 commandos from the small-scale raiding unit known as 62 Commando, who were tasked with carrying out special operations along the coastline. The ship would be sent to Sierra Leone to hunt for German radio stations, secret U-boat bases, or any other enemy shenanigans that were suspected on the West African coastline. Once arriving, the crew were tasked with intercepting and seizing Axis merchantmen, holed up in Fernando Po. This would be termed Operation Postmaster. In January 1942, the British commandos and Lassen secretly sailed from Lagos and entered Santa Isabel Harbour, where Axis officers had been lured ashore. They successfully boarded and captured the ships Duchessa d'Aosta, Licomba and Bibundi, cutting their anchor chains with explosives and towing them away in a swift 30-minute raid without any serious casualties. For showing outstanding seamanship and efficiency during the mission, Lassen was given a commission in the field. Lassen would then be tasked for a short period in training Nigerian tribesmen in guerrilla warfare, but he would soon become bored with this and want to transfer back to the UK. It's here, in Nigeria, I did hear an anecdote that Lassen was in the process of acquiring a wife for some gin and a sum of money. Clearly he decided against that, and I can't imagine Lassen coming home from a hard night's recon and raiding to be faced by an angry wife nagging him to load the dishwasher and take the rubbish out. Lassen volunteered for further service with a small-scale raiding force based in the UK. He would join them in March 1942. The force's primary roles included intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, deception operations, and coastal raids along the French coastline. These lightning raids captured enemy prisoners, seized code books, kept the enemy on edge, and also raised morale. This was what 62 Commando belonged to, and Lassen would join them. Lassen would take the war personally after Denmark was invaded and would have a specific hatred of Germans that many British found a bit disturbing. And it's also said that if he could, he would close with the enemy with a knife rather than a gun. Lassen would receive a military cross, This was a combination of heroism he displayed during an operation on the Channel Islands, which were at the time occupied by Germany, and his earlier action in Operation Postmaster in Africa. In early 1943, Lassen was sent to Egypt to set up a seaborne element under the SAS, or Special Air Service, commanded by David Stirling. But around the time Lassen arrived, Stirling was taken prisoner, so Lassen's outfit would become an autonomous unit instead, known as the Special Boat Service, or SBS. This force would focus on conducting raids into Axis-occupied Greece. During one raid, known as Operation Albumen, the unit, under George Jellicoe, would attack 3 German airfields on Crete. Lassen led a team that would attack the easternmost airfield at Castelli. He would reportedly dispatch 2 Italian sentries with a knife and pistol. However, the pistol shot taking out the second sentry alerted the garrison. Although a fierce fight ensued, the raid didn't cause significant damage. Lassen and his men thought they had destroyed 8 airplanes, but had actually just damaged 1. A Sergeant Nicholson, who served with Lassen on this raid, would state, "Lassen was a brave man and a cool man. I would call him stupidly brave, except that he kept getting away with it. And sometimes I think he got credit for things he didn't do." Castelli Airport is an example. That was no diversion, it was a bungle. Lassen and Jones were meant to be as silent as me and Greaves, who attacked another area on the airfield. Pursued by enemy forces, Lassen would escape capture by disguising himself as a shepherd, living off raw onions and cabbage, and with a colleague would reach base camp. Local villagers would bravely shelter the men, knowing the risks if the Germans found them. The raids overall, however, were a success, damaging several aircraft, although 52 local hostages were shot in reprisal by the Germans for the raids. The SBS would carry out further raids, which would aim to deceive German and Italian forces into thinking that an Allied invasion was about to occur in Greece, rather than Sicily. Showing further bravery and initiative, Lassen would receive a bar to his military cross during this time, and in September 1943 was promoted captain. Lassen would be described as arrogant, short-tempered, violent, and sometimes at low points would take his frustration out on his men. However, he would also always lead from the front and never asked a soldier to do anything he wouldn't do himself, and was fiercely loyal to his men. He would be nicknamed the Terrible Viking, and others would call him the Robin Hood Commando due to his love of the bow and arrow. Carrying out guerrilla raids in the Aegean, Lassen would distinguish himself during combat on the island of Symi, earning a second bar to his military cross in February 1944, one of only 24 officers in World War II to receive a third military cross. During these raids, the SBS would be assisted by Greek partisans and the Levant schooner flotilla. In April 1944, he led a successful raid on Santorini, causing heavy casualties amongst the island's garrison and destroying the building housing the radio installation with timed explosives. With only 2 casualties, Lassen and his force withdrew successfully aboard 2 schooners. A few months later, in August 1944, Lassen and his men would base themselves in Bari, Italy, and begin raids on the Balkans, sabotaging railway lines. Blowing up one military bridge near Dubrovnik, Lassen would become engaged in a firefight with Croatian fascist forces, losing 1 man but successfully extracted back to Italy. In October, he was promoted to major. So just think, he's a major and barely in his mid-20s. He returned to Greece to spearhead a thrust into the northern part of the country. There, he would conduct reconnaissance on Thessaloniki, even once disguised as a chicken seller. Lassen would be one of the first Allied soldiers into Thessaloniki after he decided to extend his orders and help in the liberation of Greece's second city, before the Germans had committed more acts of destruction to the city's harbours and infrastructure. During this occasion, his men and Greek partisans would be engaged in a major firefight near an ammo dump, with Lassen killing several of the enemy apparently. In northern Greece, he would also be tasked with conducting a disinformation campaign, which was aimed at convincing local Greek communist partisans that a large British force was about to invade northern Greece, and it was hoped that this information would get back to Stalin and the Soviets, and would discourage them from wanting to invade Greece from Bulgaria, as they were now pushing westwards on the Eastern Front. It was known as the Great Bluff. Between December 1944 and February 1945, Lassen was transferred to Crete for garrison and policing duties, more routine than what he's used to. By this stage, the remaining German forces on Crete had been confined to the northwest of the island, and essentially were holed up there. Lassen's main task was to keep rival Greek factions apart, a role that required delicate negotiation and diplomatic skill, and one which he found himself out of his depth. Lassen would struggle in this role, and would be relieved when the SBS would revert to their primary role soon, and Lassen would be transferred to Italy again. Here, his unit would assist the 8th Army on the east coast, near Lake Comacchio. It's on this campaign where Lassen would go on to earn his Victoria Cross. On the night of the 8th-9th of April 1945, Lassen and his men were tasked with conducting an operation on the north side of the lake. Their mission was to cause maximum disruption, give the impression of a larger force that was in the operation, and try to capture POWs. However, there was no initial reconnaissance done beforehand, so the team were essentially going into the area blind. The patrol advanced along a narrow causeway in the lake which separated the waters. They would soon engage the enemy after they were challenged near a village by sentries. Lassen immediately led aggressive assaults on successive enemy positions, using grenades and small arms fire to overwhelm multiple German strongpoints. Despite heavy resistance from machine guns and blockhouses, he personally helped neutralise several positions, allowing his men to overrun them, kill or capture the defenders, and silence their weapons. As the attack continued, the patrol suffered increasing casualties, and its firepower was significantly reduced. Lassen then reorganised his men under intense fire and pressed on against yet another position. The Germans there eventually signalled surrender after he again used grenades to force a breakthrough. During the assault, Lassen was mortally wounded whilst trying to secure the enemy's surrender. His actions would allow his patrol to briefly capture the enemy position before they had to withdraw due to low ammunition. Lassen, knowing he was mortally wounded, refused to be evacuated, not wanting to risk the lives of further soldiers. His gallantry medals are Victoria Cross, Military Cross with 2 bars, i.e. awarded 3 times, Service and Campaign Medals, 1939 to 45 Star, Africa Star, Italy Star, Defence Medal, and finally War Medal. His foreign medals are, and I know he's a Dane, but he was under British service, so his Danish medal is the King Christian X Memorial Medal, and he also has a Greek War Cross. Lassen was the only non-Commonwealth recipient of the Victoria Cross during World War II. Interestingly, Lassen would also receive a Greek Sacred Band Memorial Badge, which is now in the collection of the Museum of Danish Resistance in Copenhagen. He is buried at the Argenta Gap War Cemetery. His legacy in the SBS and in Denmark would be one of courage and self-sacrifice. Various busts or statues of the man are at Churchill Park in Copenhagen, at the main British Special Air Service base in Herefordshire, and at his birthplace, again in Denmark. There are 2 excellent books on Lassen that I have used as the main sources in this video, and they are Anders Lassen of the SAS by Mike Langley, and Anders Lassen's Krig, or War, by Thomas Harder, who is actually a Dane, I believe. Speaking of great books, you can also find my own, Class of Courage, on Amazon as well. Why not go wild and splash out on all 3? This video has been a long time coming, so I do apologise for the delay in this. but I do try to focus on Scandinavia from time to time, as I know I've got quite a few viewers there. So if you haven't watched it already, there is a video on Swedish medals where I actually visited Stockholm and got some good footage. If you like Danish themed videos, I have 2 more, and they'll pop up on the end screens in a minute. One is looking at the medals of Richard Sharp from the Sharp series, but that includes specific details on the Battle of Copenhagen, where I drill into, which Sharp was involved in the books. And the second is a more light-hearted video looking at the current ongoing Greenland-Danish dispute, seeing who's got the better medals, and also going into a bit about the order of battle for Danish forces in Greenland. Thanks for watching. I hope you found some value from this, and I'll see you in the next one.